Welcome to the Unitarian Christian Alliance Podcast, Episode 82, Experiencing the Tuggy White Debate, Street Interviews, and Post-Debate Roundtable. I'm Mark Kane. What was it like to be at the James White and Dale Tuggy debate, March 9th, 2024? I was there with a mic, and I talked to attendees before and after. You'll hear some of them today, and I take you inside the locker room, so to speak, with a post-debate discussion with several of the Unitarian Christians who were there. If you want to know what we were thinking about the next day, this is it. Today it'll be a bit more of the feel and impression of the event, not an analysis of the arguments. If you missed the debate, there's a link in the show notes, or just search YouTube for Dale Tuggy and James White debate. Alternatively, you can hear it in audio since Dale has released the whole debate on his Trinities podcast. It would help if you heard the debate first, but today will be interesting regardless. If you are a Trinitarian, and especially if you're one of the Trinitarians I met that night, I think you will be very intrigued. This podcast is your window into our world. A thought experiment for you. I'd like you to put yourself in our shoes. You know how you feel when you speak up, like you say that men can't have babies, and then the machinery of this godless society comes down on you like you are the crazy one. As a Christian in this rampantly degenerate world, you can sometimes feel crushed under the weight of it. Your faith means so much to you and makes sense, but you explain it to someone and they give you the cuckoo sign and walk away, unmoved by a word of what you said. Why is that so painful? Well, because you know that if they were only mildly curious, they could uncover a whole new side of life. They might discover the reason for the hope that is within you. That's honestly how it feels as a Unitarian Christian. We are dismissed from the onset because we are deceived, shallow, and lacking spirit. We are the crazy ones. If you were a Trinitarian at the debate and then tuned in here to learn more, well, thank you. But this is enemy territory. We are what James warned you about. And trust me, you'll hear it in the roundtable. The subversive scheming and all-out mockery of Dr. White. Unbelievable. We are terrible. Just like you suspected all along. But here's something cool. Because we are in the minority, and can be severely criticized, even when we make a valid point, we have to be many times more deliberate and thoughtful when we make a point. We have to. You may have noticed in the debate, Dale took James's opening statement seriously and engaged with each of his passages. Why? Because we have no slack. We don't have the luxury and flexibility that you get when you are in the majority and everyone just knows you are right. So what's cool is that from our side, you do get some interesting and well-considered information. If you don't agree, that's fine, but at least you can disagree with something meaty and thoughtful. That's worth it in my book. In the next episode, I plan to talk about truth and the Trinity, naturally, though it might not be what you'd expect. Like it isn't a Unitarian apologetic. It's bigger than that. And I'm including a challenge. I already love straightforward, on-the-nose scriptural facts as starting points for theologizing. I will include a set of facts that, if you are a Trinitarian, you may want to challenge. Or at least they might help you understand why it is that us Unitarian Christians have such a hard time swallowing the, quote, central and most important doctrine of Christianity, end quote. Well, thank you, Trinitarian guest, for joining me. Now, for you, my Unitarian Christian listener, I hope this episode may help you appreciate the process and the effort of a debate like this. You'll experience it through short interviews and an honest discussion with 6 of the people who traveled many miles just to be there. That discussion happened the very next day. so it's rather fresh.
We just drove out of town a couple hours to come hear Dr. White. We're really excited to hear how it goes.
Cool. Some people are on the fence, like I'm going to...
I feel like we have a pretty solid foundation on where we stand with the matter. And we're really excited to hear the other side as well, too. So it's going to be fun.
That's cool. Have you heard like from a biblical Unitarian before?
Not me personally.
Okay.
These guys might have.
All right. Well, it should be good then. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you. It's an honor.
This comes up in the Roundtable later, but many folks really had not heard of us before. Here are several other conversations I had before the debate began. Just curious, what brings you here tonight?
I enjoy watching both Dale and James and their debates.
Okay.
And actually, I'm rooting for Dale in this one.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Did you come far?
2 hours away.
All right, very good.
Yeah, I used to be a Trinitarian.
Okay.
And now Unitarian.
Well, it's good to see you here.
And I think that Yahweh is God the Father.
All right. At the end there, that was his view on the debate topic, Yahweh being the Father. What are you hoping for tonight?
I'm hoping for a good clash where they will really connect on the subject matter. So I'm really hoping that there's not a lot of talking past one another, but that there's a good clash to make for a really good debate.
That's cool. Some people are like, I'm hoping to find one. Somebody who's on the fence, who says like, I'm not sure yet. Maybe this is going to help me out. Are you one of those on the fence people, or do you feel like, no, I'm pretty settled in one side or the other?
I'm probably more on the fence than some, but I'm not going to say that I don't, of course, have my own views.
Yeah.
But I'll say like the way that the debate is phrased, I think was much more interesting. So in other words, I think that probably for most Trinitarians, had they phrased the debate, is Jesus God? Everyone would have been like, okay, no, the Trinitarians won't move or budge an inch. Framing it in the sense of, is Jesus Yahweh? For some, they do think of Yahweh more as the Father.
Yeah.
And so therefore, they would be like, okay, that's a different question in my mind, as opposed to simply saying, is Jesus God? So I'm interested in how White is going to try and frame it and show that Jesus is Yahweh, as opposed to simply arguing that Jesus is divine or God. I think would be a much less interesting topic.
I was likewise intrigued at the topic suggestion, because White picked it.
Yes.
I was like, huh. Because I would say, like, there are Trinitarians who would say, no, I don't think I would go with that.
That's right.
And there's some who would maybe say, yeah. Like,
so in that sense, I would say I'm a little bit more open. I don't know which way Tuggy is planning to go. If he's planning to just try and show that, Yahweh is simply the Father, or, I don't know. So,
okay. Have you heard Tuggy speak before?
I have.
Okay.
Yeah, I've actually had Tuggy on my YouTube channel, so we talked for a couple hours.
You have a YouTube channel?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
What is it? Can I ask?
Curious Christianity.
Curious Christianity?
Yeah. I've listened to over 100 hours of Dale Tuggy, so I'm pretty familiar.
Okay, all right, very good. That's Adam from Curious Christianity, and I've put a link to his YouTube channel in the show notes, and to a discussion with Dale about a year ago. That is an admirable level of engagement. It was great to meet you, Adam. I'm just curious where you guys stand on the like, I could walk out of here with a different opinion.
I don't think I will. I'm Trinitarian. I think I'll still hold to it, but I do want to see where it's coming from. I'm curious about that.
And you must be with him.
Yes.
Are you being drugged along, or you drug him along?
He drugged me along, but it wasn't. Yeah, it was voluntary.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Is your current thought that holding to the doctrine of the Trinity is a requirement for salvation?
I wouldn't say it's salvific. I would think it's high on priority getting that right, because it is the character of God, but I don't know that it's necessary for salvation itself. I don't know that I would go that, just because I haven't done enough research as far as that goes.
Okay.
But I think it is important to get the character of God right.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's why we're all here, because we think it's important.
Right, exactly. You hope so.
How old are you?
I'm 20.
Okay.
19.
You're awful young to go to a theological debate. What's the backstory here?
I've been saved since I was 15.
Okay.
So I've been doing research and studying for about that long. I'm just super into it. So I do volunteer work for, Got Questions?
Yeah, I use Got Questions all the time.
Yeah.
Though I disagree with most of the things I read. I'm like, I look it up as we'll call it, what do they call it? Something research, where you're trying to understand, like, well, what would somebody say?
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Do you get to write any of the articles?
Not the articles. I do a Q&A. So they have a little Q&A system where you send in, this is my question, this is my my background, and then I do the answers for that sometimes. So.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
I may have actually mentioned it on my podcast.
Oh, okay.
Free advertising. You want to get good resources,
right,
to see what people's perspectives are.
Exactly. So you're well informed and don't misrepresent.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Well, thank you so much. You guys are just gracious. I love it. That's gotquestions.org. And to be fair, when I said I disagree with most of the things I read there, it's because I typically read it for views on Christ or the Trinity. That would be a sampling bias. I can't speak for the other topics on there, but it's a great idea for a tool. And since we like helpful tools here, gotquestions.org is a great example of what people with a vision can create. Check it out.
I'm an open-air preacher.
Oh, very
tonight,
good.
when we get finished with the debate, we're going down to Washington Street. I think it's kind of a bar, red light type district. I don't really know. Some friends that are from here that are open-air preacher. We're going with them.
Well, that's cool. So are you here supporting James White?
James White has greatly enhanced what I do in the open air. We're across Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and stuff. And so the way he's taught me has greatly enhanced what I do on the street in, preaching the gospel.
Okay. I appreciate this, Thomas. It's very nice to meet you. And I wish you luck in your work on the streets later.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
You're more than welcome to come with us. Probably talking to a few drunks, but we're going to do our best.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
I was impressed at the variety of people who came. Thomas can fit a lot into one Saturday evening in Houston. I admire that. Nice to meet you. I'm with Dale's group, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I'm on the dark side of this discussion.
Okay.
But so you love this stuff.
I do. I mean, it makes you think, right? It makes you also want to research more and understand it more.
Do you have any expectations for what's going to happen tonight?
So I know Dr. James White is a good debater. Mm-hmm. I've heard him many times. I'm not familiar with the other participant. So I'm just curious to see, how they present each side, and especially what passages they bring up. And this is a common topic with other religions as well.
Oh yeah. After you listen to the Roundtable, you'll get an idea of why we were feeling discouraged. Well, it's listening again now to folks like this, which dispels that sadness. He had his wife and daughter there too. Respect.
I am a moderate Arian, so I find myself in the position between the Socinian camp, which is the Unitarian camp, and also the Trinitarian camp. I believe that Jesus Christ is God's only begotten Son, begotten before the world was. And I do believe that as God's Son, he has the same nature as his Father, but I don't believe at all for a second that he's the one true God, that he is the one who is eternal, that he has always existed, or that he is part of the one true God at all.
Okay, very cool. So like on a scale of 1 to 10, what are the chances you would change your mind after walking out of here tonight on your theology?
1.
Variety. It's cool to see a mixture of views at a debate like this. And this was a young guy too. There were many young adults there. That's cool. Why would you go to a debate? I guess that's a better question.
I learn the most by debate.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's my favorite learning platform.
Okay.
The class and exchange of ideas both these guys are experts, and so it's hard to get that out of a book or even any of their individual lecture series. You can, but once I forget the scripture, that one seems right until he's examined, right?
Yeah.
And then you learn the most during that examination. So
that's
I
good.
love debate.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Do you live near here?
I'm 10 hours away in
What?
Kansas. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So are you? Some folks are on the fence. Some folks have one particular opinion. Where do you stand? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So I am a Trinitarian.
Okay.
I think that there are a lot of interesting verses that Unitarians cite that I don't know how to deal with. But I'm definitely Trinitarian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some of these folks I could probably sit with for hours and talk about this stuff and love every minute of it. All right, so what are you expecting to happen tonight?
I feel like it's kind of like a match, like a boxing match, you know, and there's going to be a takedown. That's what I'm hoping for. What about you?
I'm really just wondering, like, people seem to have their sides, and can anyone be swayed? You know, is that possible? You know?
Yeah.
If someone is like, well, John 1, I'm done. You know, I don't know. Or do people have open eyes and open ears?
He was hard to sway.
You were one of those. So
a little bit.
You're on the Unitarian side, I take it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. He asked some good questions, though mostly rhetorical. People aren't swayed by debates, at least not on the spot. Shoot, people are barely persuaded by facts in general. It takes a lot more than a collection of facts to change someone's mind. It takes time. At this point, the room quieted, and we all took our seats for the debate. So I'll apply some time-compressing edits, and we'll just fly through the debate.
Help me put the stage away.
If your philosophical system is not big enough,
playful mountain goats chased each other around.
It is very difficult to do a rebuttal.
Here's a parallel argument for you to consider.
We have 10 minutes each for cross-examination.
He would say he saw Yahweh.
Yes. In your view, is Yahweh tripersonal?
Yes. And the soldiers fall back upon the ground.
What philosophy did you hear?
Okay, please give a round of applause for both speakers.
Perfect. Now we can see what folks thought. I spotted the young couple from before, and this was my only documented case of someone who changed their minds because of this debate, I think. But it's not what you're thinking. Recall that he didn't think the Trinity was salvific when we met earlier.
Certain things that maybe stood out to you?
I think it was really interesting. I was definitely on Dr. White's side for most of it. I think he really hit the nail on the head there with just the idea of philosophy being used a lot. I'm pretty firm in the idea that the Trinity is not something that can be understood by man. It's not something that can be developed or explained or really delved into by man's philosophy. And so trying to approach it from that angle is just inconsistent. I mean, it's cool to be able to use the scriptures to defend or argue, but I think you have to stay within that realm. I don't think you can use man's logic or man's reasoning to hit something that is a divine, holy revelation, as Dr. White said. You asked me if it was salvific.
Oh yeah, I did ask you that.
I do think it is salvific.
Okay, if somebody has a different way to explain the Trinity than the next person, is one of them saved and one of them not?
I think that's interesting. It depends on if you explain it as a heresy or not, I guess. So if I explain the Trinity as an egg, then I think I have the Trinity wrong. But I think that understanding that Christ is divine and that Christ is the one who saves and that God is the only one who can do that, I think that is the key part of it. So I think understanding that is more important than anything else.
Okay. There was a group there with him, and another fellow looked eager to join in.
Hi, what did you think about it today?
I thought it was really rich and really deep.
Oh, good.
And really enjoyable.
Yeah.
And I've followed Dr. White for a little bit of time now, and so I've seen some of Dr. Tuggy's stuff online as well, and so it's cool because you can see the different ways that they approach sections of Scripture, and you can also see how they pinpoint certain pieces of Scripture as being incredibly essential to nail down and get right. And so, especially when they both brought up Revelation 4 and 5, that was interesting. And so, appreciated Dr. White's passion, and I know that there's a bit of tension with question and answer, but I think that that's natural and it's supposed to be in place whenever something important as the Trinity is being discussed. I would definitely say they were in the subterranean of the semantics constantly, which is they're going deep into the Greek, and they're talking about the culture that surrounds the Greek. And obviously, Dr. White and Dr. Tuggy were referencing the Septuagint in a myriad of ways, and multiple times. And I think it's very important for the conversation to hang out in that depth. Residually.
Yes.
And so I think it's hard to cut down into that subterranean with human philosophy consistently. And we know that Paul referenced that, there's a necessity to destroy arguments that pivot against something that's considered biblical. I think to get down into that, you really have to be enmeshed in the original languages.
Okay, cool.
Can I actually ask you a question?
What?
If you don't mind.
Yeah, ask me a question.
So I know you were asking him.
I'm not going to play all the audio, but this guy made my night. We talked about what I thought on salvation of Trinitarians. He asked about John 1:1, and then we moved into Colossians and all things being made through Christ, then the firstborn of all creation, and from that we talked about Jesus handing over the kingdom to God in 1 Corinthians 15. Then he asked about Philippians 2 and Jesus' emptying. That was a great discussion, and he thanked me for explaining my view. I may just do an episode on Philippians 2. It has grown in significance for me of late. I think it's deep and starkly practical. So this guy was a truth seeker for sure. Another person I could sit and talk with for hours. We actually talked 20 minutes right there in the pews, and the group of maybe 10 others listened in. Most of my earlier interviewees had left by then, though not all.
First, give me your just general reaction to it.
It was fascinating. It was compelling. I would say fiery.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the more fiery ones I've seen.
Okay.
There was some getting out of the lines here and there, but that happens in most debates, as we know.
That's true.
In general, I think the points were made, and it was fun to watch.
What was your favorite point of somebody you agreed with? I don't remember who it was. It might have been White.
One of my favorites was whenever Mr. My mind's blank. Yes, Tuggy tried to use Revelation 4 and 5 as a counter argument, and then Dr. White went in after that in his rebuttal and basically preached one of the best 5-minute sermons I've heard in a long time on the Lamb standing there slain, and how in turn everyone worships him. He is outside of the creation itself, and I think that's an incredible point that you can't get around, and I think that's one of the most powerful points he made, and that was early on.
Yeah. This guy also was young, in his 20s.
So your reaction to the debate?
It's fantastic. You know, it's not easy to debate James White. I mean, obviously he's so accomplished, but Dale did a great job.
Okay.
You know, at the end of the day, it's a lot of presuppositionalism on the James side, in my opinion. In general, there's a lot of information to go through, so I'm going to have to go watch the debate 3 times.
Okay.
Like, honestly, it was just so much scriptures. And I told my daughter, who's with me, I said, it's just it's a blow mind, so you have to take it slowly. I'm going to go back and I'm going to study and continue to learn. But I felt like he did a good job.
Yeah, okay.
You know? I really liked what Dale said about the... because whenever James is talking about Revelation 4 and 5 and the creation, all things, you know, in creation, you know, obviously he's trying to say that includes himself. And what Dale said about how, maybe you can help me remember it.
The Bidens?
Yeah, but then I don't know why James said that was a bad analogy, because I thought it was great.
So notice that's 2 takes on the Revelation passage, one for Dale and one for James. It was one of the more interesting exchanges. Okay, I'll just share that part.
Look at verse 13. And every created thing which is in heaven and on the earth and under the earth and on the sea and all things in them I heard saying, to him who sits on the throne, and what's the next phrase? And to the Lamb. Every created thing. What does that tell you? The Lamb is not a created thing.
If I tell you about, the Joe Biden inauguration, and I'm sorry to bring that up in Texas, I know that's a painful subject. I didn't vote for President Grandpa either. If I say all the Bidens were there cheering on Joe Biden, this does not imply that Joe Biden isn't a Biden, or that he's up on stage and also out there cheering for himself.
I worship Jesus Christ as my creator because the Bible says that he is, and I do so in the same way with those in heaven and every created thing which is in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, and on the sea, and all things in them, which has nothing to do with all the Bidens. That was the worst example I've ever heard.
That was a bit abbreviated, but it captures the flavor of their disagreement. Spicy. Finally, I met with 3 teenagers in the meet and greet room.
Your thoughts about this debate?
I thought it was pretty good. Dr. White was interesting. He definitely had a style of debating. But I love hearing Dr. Tuggy debate, and I've listened to other debates of his online and a lot of his videos too.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it was great overall. James White, his arguments were, I think he articulated himself pretty well. He was very expressive, but Dale Tuggy's, I like what he said a lot better.
Okay. James White. What might you say he did well on?
Just the overall emotional appeal, and that is what draws a lot of people in compared to a lot of appeal to logic, because I didn't really see a lot of appeal to emotion in Tuggy's presentation.
Something that you appreciate about Dale Tuggy's presentation?
I like that he used a lot of scriptures, and I like the way he went about it. His PowerPoint was like really easy to follow, and it seemed like he went over a lot of stuff, but also analyzed it really well.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like White didn't use as much scripture, and then during the rebuttal, he didn't really address any of Tuggy's, anything that he presented in it, and he just kind of attacked him, like personally.
Well, that was fun. If nothing else, walking around with the official handcrafted UCA reporter microphone meant that I had to walk up to people and talk to them. A highlight of my night. Now to the discussion. Here are the voices you'll hear sitting around the dining room table, and I'll list them in the order you hear them during the discussion. Mark Kane, me, of course. Then Will Barlow, pastor of Compass Christian Church in Louisville, Kentucky, and a debate expert. He's already got a detailed analysis of the debate on the UCA YouTube channel. Brandon Duke, the UCA social media expert, and the guy who made the World War II analogies on opening night at the 2023 UCA conference. Sam Tideman, host of Transfigured, a YouTube channel and podcast where he has long-form discussions on the identity of Jesus. And Sam was just recently interviewed on this topic on The Council of Trent, a popular Catholic apologist YouTuber. Popular like over 5,000 views in just a few hours. Kegan Chandler, author of God of Jesus, and the reason Hildy Chandler, his mom, had the remarkable experience she did. The one I documented in what are the most popular and most shared episodes of this entire podcast. You know, where Kegan sits down with her at the dining room table, and she learns her boy might burn in hell. Episode 2. And finally, Dale Tuggy, host of the Trinity's podcast. This is a very different experience for me in a roundtable because we're sitting around a dining room table. There's food on the table, and we're also eating. So this should be really interesting. Okay. One of the people that I interacted with was just so excited about James White's performance. And he said part of his rebuttal was like the best 5-minute sermon he ever heard. I remember thinking, okay, but it's a debate. It's not a sermon. So it felt good. But there are rules to a debate. So I was like, hey, Will, could you remind us of what that's like?
Yeah, so the basic idea behind a debate is you have opening statements from both sides, affirming or denying the question at hand, which in this particular instance was, is Jesus Yahweh? So they were both given 25 minutes for opening statements. And then there's time for rebuttal. You have time for cross-examination. And then you have close. And all of those have very specific rules. In your opening statement, you're supposed to present pretty much every argument that you want to go for in the debate. The rebuttal time is meant to respond to those specific arguments. Mm-hmm. Then in cross-examination, you have time to sort of explore what the other person believes and dig into what you think are foundational problems in their view. You have to have a good faith effort on both sides, though, in terms of asking and answering questions. And sometimes that doesn't happen in these kinds of debates. There are some rhetorical tactics that seem powerful to general audience members that would totally not sway anyone grounded in the official rules of a debate. One of them is when James White opens his rebuttal by saying, Dr. Tuggy hasn't responded to anything that I've said. Well, Dr. Tuggy only gave his opening statement. He hasn't given his rebuttal yet. His rebuttal is when he has the opportunity to refute what Dr. White's opening statement is. So, we want, I think, to give him the benefit of the doubt, but in reality, it's an abusive rhetorical device, in my opinion. The fact of the matter is that they exchanged opening statements a month ago, and James White refused to respond to any of Dale's points in his rebuttal. And that's criminal in a debate. If we were to objectively grade this debate on what's called the flow, a way of taking notes in a debate, is you would have had James White's opening statement, the arguments that he made, which Dale engaged with every single one of those arguments in his rebuttal, with, of course, a time limitation of 10 minutes. Then you have had all of Dale's 25 minutes that got 0 from James White. if he's not going to respond to any of Dale's arguments, what he has to do is he has to make some sort of comparative. Well, it doesn't matter that Dale's case is this because my case is stronger or better or something. And I think that's sort of what he was trying to do, but he didn't even want to talk about Dale's arguments. And I think there's a reason for that. The reason for that is because they're very strong arguments, and he didn't have a response for them. But my point in all that is to say that James White had a month to figure all this out, and he didn't.
Brandon?
That was a pattern that I saw of projection, where you see your own weaknesses and you push them on to the other person. He did that multiple times, both with evaluating how Dr. Tuggy was doing his opening, with the rebuttal, complaining about Dr. Tuggy doing philosophy before he'd heard what Dr. Tuggy was going to say, and then interjecting his own two natures theory. You know, these are deeply philosophical concepts that he's using to prop up his case, and he's blaming Dr. Tuggy for not trusting the Bible when every one of Dr. Tuggy's arguments had direct biblical evidence for it.
Mm-hmm.
So
that thing he did where he criticized Dale.
It's poisoning the well.
Yeah, it's a fallacy.
But it works as a rhetorical device.
It does work as a rhetorical device.
Because you're discrediting the person before they get a chance to talk to the audience.
Yes, Sam?
I think that James had an intention behind that. He's sort of creating this kind of pressure or expectation from the audience for Dale to need to just focus on James, while diffusing attention away from James needing to focus on Dale, which is exactly what James didn't do the whole time. And I think, I don't know if this is a compliment or a criticism of James White, but he views debates as a persuasive performance. And there were multiple times where he was just clearly in Southern Baptist preacher mode. Another thing that might not come across on the YouTube, but that you could feel if you were there in person, was there was this energy in the room from his fans that were getting very enthusiastic and sort of amening and stuff like that when he was in full-blown rhetoric mode.
Kegan?
And speaking of fallacies, one of the things I noticed him do repeatedly was to bring up other groups to which Dale does not belong, as a way of poisoning the entire project of listening to Dale, doing everything he can to repeatedly put Dale into a category of people who he knows his audience disapproves of, who he knows his audience would never dream of associating with. It's a dishonest tactic to not take your opponent for who he is and deal with him for what he's actually saying. It's a way of helping his audience to never imagine themselves as possibly agreeing with Dr. Tuggy.
Brandon?
Yeah, there are people that when they're listening to debate, they're used to the presidential type, and so they're listening for zingers or they're rooting for their team. It's like a sporting event. And then there's people that listen to a debate and they're making a mental spreadsheet, and every argument that gets made goes in the column. In Dr. Tuggy's case, let's say 9 that he opens with. And then you're waiting to hear Dr. White give 9 responses. And you do that for both debaters. And so a perfect debate, like in theory, is one where all of the cells are filled in. But if you looked at this debate, there'd be nothing to the right of the column where Dr. Tuggy's arguments are. And there'd be all this data to the right of the column where Dr. White's arguments are. So from just an analytic perspective, that's how you know who won a debate. You could score it up that way. But that's not how everybody listens to a debate.
By structure, that is what you're supposed to do in the debate.
Yeah. And in the theory, they call it dropping an argument, where you just don't respond to it. And it's just conceding it in the theory. A good debate is, as we read through the response, counter-response, that was stronger, that was weaker. That's what's supposed to happen. There's nothing for people to do with that because Dr. White didn't engage on that part.
Oh, you can't even score it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But so many of us, we think with our guts and our hearts more than we do our heads in these environments. I mean, if you're in that room, the feeling of the room has a heavy weight when people are evaluating the truth of something too.
Yeah. Yes, Sam?
It should be also mentioned that James White has done, I think, 4 previous debates in the last month or so at this same church. Yeah. And I've listened to 3 of those. And that was a repeated thing that he did in the debates. His closing tactic would be to connect the subject back to his understanding of the gospel and or soteriology or salvation, and show that the opposing side is outside the bounds of his definition of the gospel. But he would only wait to do that till the very end. as a kind of final persuasive nail in the coffin. Although I think that James White's main motivation is not to persuade fence sitters, and certainly not to reach out to people on the other side of the fence, but to corral the sheep on his own side of the fence and keep them in line and keep them persuaded. If you already accept his definition of the gospel, then you hear this, Southern Baptist style rhetoric that is drawing up all sorts of memories and associations and feelings, and it keeps you kind of in your lane. And he did that not just with Dale, but with other previous debaters.
Kegan?
Right, and that maneuver at the end is really the culmination. It's the coup de grace, if you will, of the tactic I was describing earlier, which is to put Dale on the outside of the community of faith and to put any potential people who could be persuaded by what Dale is saying on the outskirts, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. You don't want to be out. You don't want to be out there. You want to be here in the club. You want to stay in here where it's safe and warm and where there's salvation. So it's something that he had been doing, appealing to this group identity. He continually presents Christians in his mind as the ones who believe that God died for their sins. That's in his mind what makes Christians Christians. That's the Christian distinctive, he thinks, that separates them from Jews, from Muslims, from other kind of miscreants that he might drum up. So if you start believing what Dale says, you are automatically outside. You are beyond help. You are outside the safety of the city walls.
And, if Dr. White wants to make that argument, that's totally legitimate. In your opening, say, the reason it's important that Jesus is Yahweh is it's the only way to salvation. And I'm going to stick to the Bible, and so here are my verses supporting that. No such arguments were ever offered. It was just claimed. And at the end of the debate, where Dr. Tuggy had very little time to respond to that. If your debate coach hears you do that, they're going to, nope, you introduced a new argument late in the debate. That's bad form. And it doesn't have to be malicious. It can just be you lack training or for other reasons.
Well, is it deceitful if he genuinely believes you don't get the Jesus is Yahweh thing right, you're not saved? It's hard to imagine he would not have included that in some way. So to give him the benefit of the doubt, he was revealing his true deep feelings to save his flock. That
he's saying as a debater, you can't just say all the things that occur to you that you want to say. There's a discipline required. This is why you prepare at length before debate. It shouldn't even matter who the person talking is. What matters is the argument. What matters is the truth. When you appeal to in-group identity, that's a sign you're losing. When you're winning, you can just stick to your arguments. When you're losing, you have to either go to ad hominem, you have to poison the well ahead of time. Like, if I were to have somebody that I was advising open with, here's all the reason this guy isn't trustworthy, I'd be like, you're being a coward. You have to show them respect, say they're worth your time. And if you really think you can win on every argument, you don't have to do that. Maybe cowardliness is too strong, but it's a sign of weakness when you do that.
The technical phrase for what Brandon's describing there is you're going for a certain argument at close. So like you have the set of arguments that you want to go for in your final speech. And the fact that the things that he was going for were things that were not really in his opening statement. And then he's attacking Dale for eisegesis in the last speech when he didn't even respond to any of Dale's arguments. It's just like beyond the pale, really, from a rhetorical perspective.
It occurs to me, people may be listening to this and going, no one cares about all this technical how debates should go. The reason we're talking about it is because there wasn't the kind of clash, there wasn't the kind of interaction that you'd want to see from Dr. White to what Dr. Tuggy said. Because if you're not really clashing with the arguments back and forth, you're not giving the audience the truth seeking that they're after.
Well, you're right. Describing the purpose and the structure of the debate may seem dry and like they're talking about this because they want to find reasons to criticize James White because, well, they obviously lost the debate. Therefore, you have to come up with something to pick on. But it's a practical thing because the way Dale prepared for the debate was based upon how the debate works. If you watched a baseball game where one team had their set of rules and the other team had the official set of rules, and when the game was over, you're like, man, Team A just nailed them. You would want to know that, well, Team A used the model that you could just tap the base with your foot and you scored every time you tapped the base.
I can bring baseballs with me to the plate and throw them up in the air and hit and keep going until they can't field it, and they got to field all 5 of them, and I'm going to run the bases while that happens.
If you don't know what's happening, if you're playing by 2 sets of rules, you should know what those 2 sets of rules are, because you can then objectively understand what just played out in front of you in the debate.
Yeah.
Sam?
I think he did respond to Dale's point, but in a weird backwards kind of way. James is perfectly willing to subordinate logic or reason or formal argumentation for what he believes are basically divine commands through revelation. And so if he thinks that he's got 1, 2, or 3 verses that he just can't see any way around Jesus being Yahweh in, he doesn't care about likelihood ratios of all this and that, the other thing. And in fact, it's almost a badge of honor for him that he's willing to suspend those kinds of persuasive arguments by submitting to what he sees as basically some sort of divine command. So when he's not responding to Dale's 9 points of this point is true in the New Testament, it's more likely for a Unitarian hypothesis than a Trinitarian hypothesis, or a Jesus not being Yahweh hypothesis than a Jesus being Yahweh hypothesis. It's like, I just actually don't care about that. So that is the closest he gets to engaging with it, because he actually just doesn't care about reason in that way. I think there's even something deeply strangely cynical about James White's view of reason, because he actually doesn't really respect reason and views it as something of a human weakness to want to rely on reason. He uses reason cynically. If his opponents are making a reasonable point, he doesn't care, but he's willing to use reason to try and persuade these evil suckers who do believe in reason. And there's something strangely dark about that. It's sort of like what you're saying, like, I'm going to use these people who trust the rules of baseball. I'll follow the rules when it's to my advantage, but at the end of the day, if they're not to my advantage, then I won't follow the rules of baseball.
During cross-ex, and I will, this is like the one note that I would give Dale if I was a debate judge. During cross-examination time, you have to ask questions. Now, you can make statements if they immediately lead to the question. And Dale was, after questions, sort of summing up what James was saying, and James White attacked him repeatedly. So here you have an example where the rules of baseball apply only to Dale until it gets to cross-ex. And then, all of a sudden, now we're going to follow the rules of cross-examination rigorously, because that's how debates are just done, Dr. Tuggy. Is you can't just... He's doing all these things throughout the debate that's signaling to those of us that understand debate that he doesn't care about the rules of debate. He doesn't care about the rules of formal logic or argumentation. But he does when it comes to him getting cross-examined and Dale's hammering him on stuff that he doesn't want to answer and he's being evasive. And now Dale's pointing out to the audience that he is being evasive. And now I want to respond to that, Dr. Tuggy. You're not letting me respond. Okay, well, that's because the rules don't apply to James White unless they do.
In my defense, I didn't really understand the expectations. In a lot of debates among philosophers, there's kind of more of a free-for-all in the middle. Honestly, I would have met the expectations if I understood. It's my fault. I should have asked the pastor more about it. When you see a lawyer cross-examine in court, they'll ask a question, but they will comment on it too. Yes. And I thought mistakenly, again, it's my fault, I thought that they would view it as, well, this guy's just burning his question time, so who cares if he just wants to throw in a sentence there. Right. But their view was, nope, you have violated the commandments of the debate deities, and this is a major sin. So I realized I was doing it halfway through, and I'm like, okay, I shouldn't do that. So that's the one thing I would do differently. What I was trying to bring out is that his views imply contradictions, and so cannot all be true. And if you have an interpretation of the Bible that implies contradictions, then you're foisting falsehood onto the Bible. Now, to him, you just shouldn't do this. You should just pick a text, use your Greek, make some deductions, and call it a day. But look, even he doesn't want most contradictions, right? Like, if he read this passage and thought this guy was the first apostle, and he read another passage and implied the other guy was the first apostle, he wouldn't just say it's a mystery, or it's both, you just accept both. He would try to harmonize it. Okay, but that's what we do with Jesus and God.
He's offering one reading of Scripture and a way to understand it as a whole. You're offering an alternative one, and we're comparing the strengths of those two. So if one of them appears to have contradictions in it, that's a signal that there's something wrong with the interpretation. Not something wrong with the Bible itself, something wrong with their interpretation of it. So to bring those up, those are inherently biblical points. It's a biblical approach to say, you're not reading it correctly. And here's some clues to how we can know that you're not reading it correctly. I'm curious, Dr. Tuggy, how did you imagine the cross-examination playing out? Because it was contradictions, but it was more than that too, right? There's something hidden in Dr. White's case.
Yeah, there were a couple of things going on. I mean, in his opening, he didn't mention any of the two natures stuff, which was weird because that's what it's all in defense of. So I was trying to get him to talk more about two natures, but I was also trying to get him to see that your views do clash with the New Testament. You know, honestly, I thought he was going to filibuster worse than he did. So I got through way more of my questions than I expected.
Were there any questions that his answer surprised you? There was one that surprised me, but I would like to get your opinion on it before I give my answer on it.
No, man, lack of sleep is a rough taskmaster.
Yeah. The question that he answered that surprised me was when he said that he agreed that Jesus had limited knowledge in the incarnation. Because in his book, I'm pretty sure I'd have to look and see if I can find the quote, but I think he essentially says that Jesus doesn't lose any divine attributes in the incarnation, which would presumably include, foreknowledge or knowledge. And so therefore, him saying that in the debate seems to be a contradiction with his own writing, which, look, not that you're going to catch him in a contradiction with his own book on a night full of contradictions, like you're expected to do that on the fly or something like that. But that answer surprised me. That's not what I expected him to do with that question.
It's just part of creedal orthodoxy that you can't lose any essential divine attributes when you gain the other nature. They say stuff like the properties of the natures remain unchanged and things like that. So most of the church fathers say things like, oh yeah, he really did know the day and the hour, but he just wasn't authorized to say it or something. For some reason, he's basically pretending. In modern times, people have kind of reacted against that. They're like, I don't want to say this guy's deceiving everybody.
I think that he might have been trying to say that Jesus's human nature was limited in knowledge for some reason. He almost even suggested that he didn't know what that reason was. Like he said something like, it must just be the case that when in his incarnate state, which I think he means maybe the human nature, is limited in that sort of knowledge for some reason. And all he needs to say is like, this is a brute fact of the New Testament. Jesus is Yahweh, but Jesus didn't know the day or the hour. I don't need a reason. But that it's my own humility that allows me to not need to know the reason.
Well, but if it's the human nature that has limited knowledge, you now have two persons. You have the limited knowledge person and the complete, perfect, omniscient knowledge person.
I would quite like to be able to do that anytime I have an idea that doesn't work. Oh, yeah, I see all the problems you're pointing out, but in humility, I'm just going to identify my idea as the best idea.
In humility.
Yes, that's right.
But see, that's the thing. That is not humility. To foist contradictions onto somebody who's not stupid. Like if you write a letter to somebody, you expect them to interpret it in a non-contradictory way if they can. That should be a last resort, that you're just simply contradicting yourself. So to the extent that we respect the writers of Scripture and the inspirer of Scripture, we cannot just go around merely attributing contradictions to it. Philosophers call it uncharitable. That's not how we want to be interpreted. It's weird how little he cares about contradictions. I don't understand it.
This was the first live theological debate that I've ever been to, which I know is probably weird because, people who listen to the podcast think Mark must be involved with everything theological. And it was stressful just to watch it all play out because I sat in the little, what do they call those? The nexus? I don't know. It's the wings of the church that poke out to the side. So I was sitting sideways and I could turn my head to the left and look across the crowd. And just seeing the reactions of the people and noticing when people weren't paying attention, when they were paying attention, and it felt like it was a game, a little bit like a sports event. Yeah, I don't know. Like I can see why some people steer clear of debates because they are a little bit stressful. But at the same time, I don't know, there's like 200 people in this room. Despite what some people think, debates are all terrible, we shouldn't do them, or that's the only way we could do it. It's like debates are just one amongst this set of tools. And there are people like this church, who do this and facilitate it and do it over and over and over again. And I was like, I was actually very impressed and pleased to see that happen. Kegan?
Yeah, one of the things we should point out is that this is such a great way to get information out to people. Holding this physical in-person event, people are drawn and attracted to something like that who might not otherwise read a 4 Views book or try to digest information in that way. For example, there we were sitting on the front row, and we couldn't help but hear a group of Trinitarians behind us. They were saying some incredible things like, I don't know how Dr. Tuggy, as a Unitarian Universalist, can hold such and such view. Of course, we tried not to eavesdrop, but the pain became unbearable.
I tried to eavesdrop.
Eventually, we had to turn around and say, we couldn't help but overhear you referring to Dr. Tuggy as a Unitarian Universalist, and just wanted to let you know that he's not a Unitarian Universalist. They said, oh, wow, really? But what kind of other Unitarian, could there be? And we proceeded to inform them that there are Christians out there who they believe in Scripture. They're probably very similar to them in many ways, and yet they just don't believe in the doctrine of the Trinity. Those people we would call Unitarian Christians. And they looked at us like we had 3 heads. They had, that wasn't a Trinity joke, by the way. Right? But ultimately, they had never heard of Christians like us before. And when we informed them that we too were Unitarian Christians, they were aghast. I then got to point out an entire row. I said, yes, this entire row of people here are like Dr. Tuggy in their views. They thought that was incredible.
I think it's worth saying, we've been processing the discomfort we all experienced in the debate. And that discomfort, we're trying to sort of name it. The discomfort is not that Dr. Tuggy's performance was bad or that his arguments weren't good. What was disturbing is that the performance was good. The arguments were good. But we sat in that room and we felt the energy of an audience that was responding to Dr. White's less good arguments, less good behavior. And there's something deeply disturbing to those of us that are really committed to truth, that there's going to be that kind of drag on the process.
Well said.
The reality is that there is some subset of the audience there supporting Dr. White's position. They're not really there to be introduced to new information, to see how the other side sees the world. In fact, I kept my eye on a few people in the audience. There were 2 people that I was looking at because they kept literally fist pumping whenever Dr. White would say something. And then I noticed that as soon as Dr. Tuggy would get up and begin to speak, they would begin scrolling on their phone or messing with their kids at their feet. So they were really there to support the home team, not really to digest information. I'm not saying everybody was like that or even the majority on his side, but we should just understand that there's going to be some subset of that population, and you're not going to persuade them. It doesn't matter how good Dr. Tuggy's arguments are. They are there to fist pump, and that's what they're going to do. And
But yet it must be said that not all of the attendees were like that. After the debate, they had each of the debaters go into a separate room so they could kind of greet people that were there. And I talked to, 10 or 12 Trinitarians, and they were all lovely people. They had good questions. They were serious and curious. What about this passage? And I was very happy to talk to them. And that's partly why I do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, to be clear, if 100,000 people see this debate, 100,000 people now know that Dr. Tuggy's not a Unitarian Universalist.
If you think, okay, what would victory look like? What's the most we could ask for? Okay, it's not reasonable to expect that Dr. White is going to become a Unitarian on the spot. Right? It's not reasonable that 100% of the audience immediately sees our point of view and thinks it's convincing. Well, if you think about it, like the people who were sitting behind us in the pews, they came to the debate imagining that there could be no possible defense for this kind of view. It's totally indefensible. It is crazy. It's wild. How could anybody believe something like this? That was the kind of attitude that they came there with. Yeah. So at the very least, if they weren't persuaded by Dr. Tuggy's arguments towards a Unitarian point of view, they at the very least learned there are arguments that can be made. There is a defense that can be given. They might not ultimately agree with it or not right now, but that's more than they came there with.
I totally agree with what the rest of you guys have been saying, that it felt like going to an away game. Like if you've ever traveled with, your college sports team and you go to your big rival and 80-90% of the seats are filled by people wearing the colors of your opposing team, and there's not quite a threat of violence, but a feeling of almost kind of palpable danger, or that you're at the mercy of these people because they so thoroughly outnumber you. It did have that feeling. But I don't think that'll come across on YouTube. And I think it'll be interesting for people who are listening at home. Yeah, they might be able to hear some audience noise, but they won't have heard the hour of conversation that we heard hanging out in the church before the debate got started, and just sort of that intangible feeling in the room. And so I think that this will probably look even more favorable to Dale if someone is watching it without that sort of home team versus away team feeling. And I think that that'll be interesting to see some of the reactions of people who only process this debate electronically as opposed to being in person.
Interesting.
Talking about what victory looks like, any of us that have changed our mind on something, we know that it doesn't happen in a night. We know that the seeds get planted and we chew on it and we mull it over and we're sleeping and our brains are working. And 6 months or 12 months later, then we have this like aha moment. I've been on this sort of gradual, slide down into the water, and I'm like, oh, it's nice and cool here. This is great. I was up on the hill and now here I am, but I don't remember walking all the way down. So there's a sense in which Dr. Tuggy is planting seeds, and we all are. When we share these ideas, when we're advocates for this with our friends and family and our wider community, we're trying to give them the same space and room to think about this stuff and come to the truth.
Kegan?
On behalf of the board, I want to thank everybody for showing up, for the people who were able to. I know many, many people wanted to come and weren't able to, and we appreciate your online support for Dr. Tuggy and for this event. But thank you especially to the people who sacrificed so much time away from their families, money, etc., to come down and to be physically present there in that room. Because not only did people get to hear Dr. Tuggy's arguments on stage, they got to see real life Christians for whom these things greatly matter. People who are not so easily spirited away in keyboard warrior format, right? These are real Christians that you have to look at face to face and deal with them and talk to them and try to put yourself in their shoes to engage in a meaningful way. So it's so valuable that we had so many people turn out, and we just really couldn't be more thankful. And I'd also like to take a second to say that we really appreciated the pastor. We really appreciated First Lutheran Church of Houston. We had some great conversations with the pastor afterward, and I really appreciate him opening up a space for this honest engagement.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I really appreciate Kegan and Lauren for hosting me, and the four of you guys who traveled a very long way to be here with me in the away bleachers. It's very encouraging and very helpful. I also wanted to thank Will Barlow and Mark Kane, who were super helpful critiquing my presentations and helping me think through the debate strategy. That was really an advantage and an encouragement and helping me to up my game.
Thanks.
Doing this, honestly, it's just as stressful as you would think it is. I'm kind of used to it, but when you enter the room and you feel kind of the hostility, and kind of how James White is, you realize what you're in for. And I especially wanted to thank the people that were praying for me at Allegiance to the King and Kingdom Gospel Church. It makes almost like a tangible difference. It happened to me last time I went into a stressful event too, and thanks.
All right. Well, thank you guys for sitting down and talking through your meal. You guys ate so quietly too. It's beautiful. Like this.
We appreciate you lowering your standards here, Mark, for our benefit.
No, it was a blessing to just be a part of it, and yes, to sit around and to talk about it with all of you. It was great. Thank you for your thoughts, Dale. One additional thought. I thought I knew what philosophy was. But after this debate and these short interviews, I'm going to have to brush up a bit. You know, cut through the opinions to strike the bone of definition. Reminder that we have a young adult event in Tennessee in June, and in July, a youth event in Indiana, the one where I met the quizzers that I interviewed in episode 59. Then in the UK, we have the first International UCA Conference, July 25 through 27. Save the dates, we have registration coming soon. Finally, our stateside UCA Conference will be in Arkansas this year at a lovely retreat center, October 17th through 19th. See details on these and instructions on how to get your events listed. Visit UnitarianChristianAlliance.org/events. You can write me, podcast@UnitarianChristianAlliance.org. I love to hear from you, and I'd enjoy hearing what you think of this unique episode. Maybe we should do things like this more often. Or if you were one of the Trinitarians I met at the debate, and you listened to this because I handed you my podcast business card, then I would love to know the little card worked. Let me know. podcast@UnitarianChristianAlliance.org. Oh, and if you're thinking, maybe I'll listen to a few more episodes, maybe, then I'd suggest trying episode 1, where I talk about what we're doing here, and then episode 2. Hildy Chandler, who I mentioned before, is like you, a Trinitarian, and one who is not exactly enthusiastic about how this topic came up in her home. I know there's a lot of follow-up content to the recent debate. I've mentioned Will Barlow's expert debate analysis, and if you aren't that familiar with debating, that is a wealth of information. And for James White's opening remarks, main texts, we have 4 response videos. These go into more detail and offer plausible and alternate explanations. Those are by Will Barlow, Sean Finnegan, Jerry Wierwille, and Dustin Smith. Then Dale talks at length about his debate experience with Sean Finnegan on Restitutio, episode 539, and he also has an interview with Tom Huszti, episode 55, on his YouTube channel, Unitarian Anabaptist. I suspect Dale will be heard on several other programs, too. Sorry if I missed yours. I wonder if Adam from Curious Christianity will talk about it, too. Oh, James White also reflects on the debate on his Alpha and Omega Ministries channel. That's where I learned we were shallow and lacking spirit. Maybe you know someone who wanted to go. Share this episode with them so that they can at least get a taste. And thanks to you 5, the team of miscreants and heretics who showed up in Houston for the debate and who humored me by letting me shove tiny mics into your faces while you ate lunch. It's an honor to work with you. May God bless you in your truth pursuits. I hope this podcast serves you well.